then we'll take it from there. So hang on. Okay, so this is a question I get asked a lot. What the heck is a dulcimer? So I put together some photographs, some of which I've taken during my travels, and some I pulled off of the internet just for this occasion. So let me get my little list here, kind of keep me on track. So to answer that question, I put together these photos, and I've got no fewer than 10 dulcimers in my living room here that I'll be showing you over the next 45, 50 minutes, whatever it is. But the short answer is that the modern version of the Appalachian Mountain dulcimer, also known as a lap dulcimer, fretted dulcimer, plucked dulcimer, and believe it or not, hog fiddle and duck slapper. Yes, those are real nicknames for this instrument. It can trace its roots back about 300 years. So let me go through these pictures with you. First of all, it's technically a diatonically fretted zither. Now, a zither is characterized as any string instrument with its strings all stretched across a box, either solid or hollow, of various shapes from end to end, without any sort of a neck. Now, up in the upper left-hand corner there is a modern zither, which also includes a fretboard, similar to what you'd find on a guitar, laid on the body of the zither. And the left hand is fretting some chords and some melody notes, while the right hand is also plucking that melody and filling in chords from the other strings. I've never played a zither before, and after looking at that picture, I know that I never will look at a zither and try to play that. The one on the bottom predates that by about 100 years, and that does not have any kind of a fretboard or fingerboard on it. It's just a bunch of strings, again stretched across a box and tuned probably chromatically, and the player reaches across it much as a harpist would reach across the strings of a harp. The auto harp is a zither. Hammered dulcimer is a zither. Japanese koto and Chinese guzheng are all examples of zithers. Now, the first description, or depiction rather, of a zither that we know about was in a fresco that was painted in the 1500s in a Danish church. And it shows an angel strumming a box-like zither with her fingers. This is the oldest existing zither that we know about. This is from Scandinavia, and we think it was built somewhere around the 1500s. Similar instruments from this area would go by different names. In Norway, it would have been called the langeleik. In Sweden, it would be the hummel. In France, it would be the epinette. And this is a zither. It's got a little fretboard on it and a couple of strings on the side. You can see up here the little pegs indicate that there are probably 2 strings on the left and 2 or 3 strings on the right. So again, just like that first zither I showed you, the player would finger a melody along here and then strum across the other strings. This is a langspiel related to that. It's Icelandic, but many Danes and Norwegians settled in Iceland, so that's where it would have originated. The shape on this is interesting. It's rounded on this side, but straight on the other side, and is played with a bow. And you also see that little fretboard there, which is used exactly as the other zithers that I showed you. This is a Hungarian zither, and I was fascinated by this. It looks as if their fretting was kind of imitating what the piano keyboard would have looked like. You've got the white keys down here, but then you've got some black keys up here, maybe. I'm guessing. And then all the other strings across here, each of varying lengths. And I was also fascinated how they built the zither to actually accommodate the shorter and higher strings. But in Germany, it would have been called the Scheitholt. Now here's a couple of museum quality Scheitholts. This example here especially, you get a very good clear picture of the diatonic fretboard. And I'll talk more about that, and I'll demonstrate what that's all about. The Scheitholt falls into the category of drone zither. So instead of the remaining strings on the other side of the zither being plucked and also creating part of the melody or the chords, these Scheitholts were played the melody along here, and then the fingers were drawn across all the rest of the strings, creating a drone effect. And this same shape spread throughout Northern Europe, but it is the German version, this very instrument right here, that arrived in America during the early 18th century. These instruments have two sets of strings, one set to play the melody and the other set to play the drones, kind of like a bagpipe. And in general, they ranged anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12 strings all the way across. Here are two examples of Scheitholts that were built in Pennsylvania in the 1800s, and it shows you the irregularity on the frets along the fretboard. They look like they're spaced funny, and there's a reason for that. They are diatonically spaced rather than chromatically spaced. Again, I'll demonstrate all that in a minute. This is an extremely easy instrument to play because of the placement of these frets. Anybody with any experience or no experience whatsoever can sit down and play a melody almost instantly. In fact, I teach dulcimer beginner workshops, and one of the advertising things I use in my description of those workshops is guaranteed you'll be playing a melody within 5 minutes, even if you have no idea anything about music. And it is absolutely true. They are that easy to play. But you can also make it kind of more complicated, which a lot of dulcimer players, including yours truly, have done. Now, the Scots-Irish settlers could hear the drone of the pipes in this sturdy and easily constructed zither. They reduced the number of strings because, frankly, out in the wilderness, it was kind of hard to get wire to make the strings. So most of them ended up with only 3 strings. And that's very much the way the current dulcimers look. Here's some pictures of some dulcimers I saw when I was at a workshop in Virginia. Different shapes. The Shenandoah Valley has a tradition of teardrop or boat-shaped dulcimers. Kentucky is known for the delicate hourglass-shaped 3-string instruments. And Tennessee is home to a large rectangular dulcimer known as the Tennessee Music Box. This is a modern repro of what a Tennessee Music Box would have looked like. It looks very simple, very primitive, but it makes music. And to me, this looks like just 1/4-inch plywood nailed on with some brads, and then this fretboard stuck on the top. And you can see how the irregular frets, diatonic, are consistently in place on this one. And remember that the so-called Pennsylvania Dutch settlers actually came from Germany, Deutschland, and the Scheitholt was the instrument that came over with them. They traveled the great Philadelphia Wagon Road, and if you've ever been on I-81 going down to Virginia, that was the original Philadelphia Wagon Road. And the dark line there follows the I-81 corridor. It used to be old US 11. If you ever want to make a trip down towards Roanoke, get on US 11. It'll take you all day, but it'll be a wonderful trip. Then when you get down to the southern end below Roanoke, this area here is known as the land of the crooked road. I actually have a bumper sticker on the back of my camper that says, "I traveled the crooked road." And that was the heart of, that's like Mecca. Dulcimer players flocked to the crooked road annually for festivals and just hanging around and making music anywhere and everywhere. This is a dulcimer found in Floyd County, which is in the heart of that Crooked Road country. And by the way, the Floyd Country Store has nonstop music, probably year-round, but during festival time, it's a hopping place. Any kind of music you can imagine. It's just it's worth the trip. Trust me on that. Look up Crooked Road Festival. And by the way, Dana, I'm going to send you some links that you can put up on the website for the folks. So this dulcimer was built in 1832, and it's signed by the guy who built it. So we know for sure this dulcimer's origin. It's still in beautiful, beautiful shape. Most of the dulcimers made a couple of hundred years ago were using wood such as poplar, which was readily available. But these days, most of the dulcimers are made of walnut or maple or cherry or other more exotic woods such as butternut, for instance, and have ebony accoutrements. So I'll show you some of those as well. Most of the dulcimers back in the day were not made by so-called actual builders. They were just kind of crafted together by the country people, made for their family, their neighbors, that sort of thing. This is an example of a boat-shaped dulcimer, and highly decorated. I don't know whether that was ink or some kind of a dye, but the entire dulcimer is covered with that decoration. And the scroll here, sound hole, they could be made any shape, but round circles, and the kind of like what you'd find on a violin, the F hole, same thing on this one. And also a lot of hearts, you see, particularly on the Kentucky dulcimers. Now this one next to it is a teardrop shape. You can't see the top end of it, but it gradually comes down and turns into a teardrop. And that was a popular shape in Virginia especially. Now there's one person who's responsible mainly for bringing the dulcimer out of Appalachia into the modern world, and that's this lady right here. You may never have heard of her. She is the queen of the dulcimer world. She was born in Kentucky in 1922. She was the youngest of 14 children, if I remember correctly. And her grandfather or somebody had built a dulcimer. Nobody was playing it. It was underneath the grandmother's bed, and she found it there one day and took it out and tuned it up, and she had a lovely, lovely singing voice. And that kind of became her instrument. Well, it so happened she landed in New York City in 1950, married a New Yorker, and she and her husband, I believe his first name was George Picot, they were part of the folk revival in Greenwich Village in the 1950s and 60s. And she was the only one there with a dulcimer, and she's cheek by jowl with people like Happy Traum and Joan Baez, Joan Collins, Dave Van Ronk, all the folks that made the 50s and 60s what they were in terms of folk music. She was right there. So we dulcimer players owe her a great deal. She brought it out of the mountains to the general public. She died just 5 years ago in Kentucky. I had the great pleasure of attending a performance that she gave about 20 years ago. And then she had quit performing. She had a stroke, but she was a great lady. Now, since the 60s, the dulcimers staked a claim in the American orchestra of rock and roll, pop, jazz, country, blues, and classical, and is becoming more and more popular. You may not be aware that certain contemporary artists by the name of Joni Mitchell, Lady Gaga, Dolly Parton, occasionally play a dulcimer in their sets. And so for the last picture, I couldn't resist showing you this one. This is not in my collection. This is Dolly Parton's dulcimer. Those are Swarovski crystals. She comments she could never pass up a bunch of rhinestones. And so her dulcimer was decorated with that. And it recently went up for auction at Christie's, and I believe the highest bid was $37,000. I was not in the audience. But anyway, so that's the end of that. So coming back now to my living room, where I have gathered lots and lots of dulcimers to share with you. And you have a little overhead camera here. I'm nestled in between my bass and my harp and my piano, and I'm surrounded here by about 10 dulcimers. And with any luck, my cat, who's asleep in the other room, will stay right there. Okay, so this is a dulcimer that I own, and it is a reproduction of a dulcimer that would have been built in the late 1800s. This was built by a guy named Kevin Messenger, who lives in West Virginia. And I'm hoping that the light allows you to see. Let me hold it up to the overhead camera. There are 3 strings on here. There's a melody string, and then 2 drone strings. And this is built in the Kentucky shape, and the hearts pointing in opposite directions were a popular design in the 1885 or thereabouts. This was built from the exact plans of a guy named Charles Pritchard, who was building them at the time. Now, what's cool about this is everything hand carved. The little tuning knobs up here are hand carved. The top scroll is hand carved. The headstock is made of walnut, and the sides are made of walnut. But the back and front, the top, is made from wormy chestnut. Kevin found this mantelpiece in an old abandoned Pennsylvania farmhouse and took it out and made it into lots and lots of dulcimers. So now this gives me the opportunity to show you what the diatonic fretting is all about. If I put my finger here on the 3rd fret, and I'm hoping that's showing up well in your, down in the lower corner, you'll see the overhead view. I hope that's coming through nicely. And by the way, at any time, if you have a question, I can't see you. My screen is so far away, I can't see the chat or anything like that. Just interrupt me anytime. Unmute yourself and say, hey, Carol, question, you know, whatever. Don't be shy about that. So because of the way this is fretted now, I can play a major scale. I don't have to know anything about music at all. In fact, when I first started playing, I think I knew too much about music, and I was trying to make this simple folk instrument way more complicated than it needs to be. So I'm playing a major scale without having to think about, well, if there was a fret here or a fret here, like a chromatic instrument would be, such as a guitar, I don't have to worry about that. In fact, well, let me get out something here. I showed you in that picture of Jean Ritchie, I should have mentioned in her left hand, she was using a noter. Now here's a fancy version of a noter. She would have just been using a stick of wood. And this was often used to slide around on the melody string. She would have used a turkey quill. I'm fresh out of turkeys today, but this is one of my favorite picks. It's just a square, or a triangle rather, of plastic. It's very flexible. I like how it bends. So that's an example with a noter, but they liked to play their fiddle tunes. Let me play one called Merrily Kissed the Quaker. they'd be dancing all night to that song and probably hundreds of others. The other thing that's unique about this diatonic tuning, I've got two modes on this dulcimer, and I'll talk more about the modes as we go on. This is Ionian. I'm starting here on the 3rd fret and just playing up to the 10th fret. But if I start on 0 and play up to the 7th fret, I've got a different mode. Mixolydian. And a lot of music uses that flatted 7th. Now, they might have had knowledge of these terms, Ionian and Mixolydian, but it didn't matter whether they knew what they were talking about or not. In fact, I've got a sign on the wall over there. It's signed by this dude named Joe Clark. It says, "There ain't no dulcimers there ain't no notes on a dulcimer. You just plays it." And that's what they did. One of the greatest dulcimer players I ever met, I was astounded to discover he didn't know how to read music. I asked him, well, you played your F sharp on a certain place instead of up here? And he looked at me with his hillbilly beard and his 9 teeth in his head, but he could play. And he said, "Carol, I don't have any idea where an F sharp is, and you know what? I don't even care." He just played it by ear, and that was the tradition. A lot of people still play it that way, but a lot of people, particularly as the years have progressed, with new innovations and new changes to the modern day dulcimers, more and more of us are getting really, really fancy with it. Now I'm going to keep this on my lap just for a second so you can compare with one that I use a lot. Okay, again, look in the overhead. And I'll try and keep these both on my lap. Now they're both about the same length from stem to stern. This dulcimer from nut to bridge is 27 inches. This one is about 28 inches, and that's considered standard. But the biggest thing you notice, first of all, is the frets on the modern dulcimer go across all the strings. Now that gives the advantage, instead of always playing drony bagpipe sounds, now we can play chords, and most of us do all the time. You can mix and match. The other thing you notice is that there's a lot more frets on this dulcimer. This dulcimer has a 6.5 fret, which was a fairly recent addition. In 1969 or so, a dulcimer builder down in the Washington area decided to put an extra fret. Now, if I play this dulcimer, I can play the Ionian or major scale, but before that fret got added, I couldn't. I could only play Mixolydian. So this guy thought, why not have two for the price of one? I can now play two different major scales without having to retune or without having to pick up another dulcimer. So there's extra frets here and here that would have never been considered on these early ones. Who knows? People are building chromatic dulcimers now, but I haven't crossed over to that dark side yet. I still like my diatonic, slipping it up into.
Carol, can I ask a question about the frets from one dulcimer to another, and even the different styles that you showed? Are the frets all like in exactly the same place, exactly the same distance apart?
Yes, in relationship to the whole and half steps. Some dulcimers 27 inches long, and there are formulas for a 27 inch. You'd place the first fret in a certain place and so on, so that they would be perfectly in tune, right? A 25 inch dulcimer, the frets would be slightly closer together. And there are formulas that builders have developed and templates that they work from. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a modern, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Carol, Becky here. Could you explain a little bit more? I'm curious about the noter. Is it a particular material that's made of? I understand how you use it, but does one type of noter vary from a different one?
They come in all shapes and sizes. They can be made from wood. They could actually be the top of a pencil using the metal part. You know, anything that will hold its shape. Let me just use the top of a pen.
Do different materials create different sounds?
Not necessarily. People
Okay.
will say so, but I don't think it's true.
All right then.
It's still going to be dragging. This is a red pen I have, okay? It makes that slidey sound that
Mhm.
is so typical of the old time sounds. Good
Are
question.
those, I'm going to just ask one more question, then I'll get out of the way. When you played it, it looked like the Hawaiians would play a steel guitar with or a guitarist would put a capo on his guitar neck in order to change the key.
Mhm.
But I'm thinking more of like a steel guitar. Does that accomplish the same purpose? And are they made, is there any difference in using one type of material or another? It's just meant to just hold down the key to a certain place.
That's it. It's just meant to hold it down.
Okay.
Yeah. They're not using a capo, they're actually using a heavy steel slide
Mhm.
that would go up in the Hawaiian guitar players and the steel players.
Right.
Same effect. It gives a nice drony sound. You know,
Mhm.
it's very unique.
Mhm.
Some of the some of the weights are made from ceramic, and I'll tell you, the old blues guitarists back in the day, they used a bottleneck. They'd break off the top of a whiskey bottle or a wine bottle
Mhm.
and soften the edges, you know, so it wasn't sharp. And
Mhm.
they would put that over a finger and rub that up and down as they go.
Well,
Same
that's
effect.
interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you. So this is a modern dulcimer. This was built by a guy up in Rochester, and I have two of his dulcimers. He's one of my favorite builders. He's 80, still building, and I'm still buying dulcimers from him. So this is a modern dulcimer that is typical of what you would find in any dulcimer player's home right now. So I'm going to play a little medley of some typical I guess you'd call them fiddle tunes or dance tunes or whatever. I mentioned about the Mixolydian scale. The tune called Old Joe Clark uses that scale because it came naturally on those original dulcimers. You didn't have to think about it. Let's see. Then I'm going to jump into a dance song called Rochester Schottish. And then a kind of a different version of a piece called Arkansas Traveler. You might be familiar with these in one form or another. Sorry, it's wiggling around on it. Little different version of Arkansas Traveler. Wiggled around on me a little too much, but you get the idea.
Carol,
Yes.
it's Chef Leonard. Are the strings all in fifths?
Yes, thank you. I was going to mention that. This dulcimer is tuned DAD 158 tuning. Open fifths, there's no thirds at all. In order to get a real true D major chord, I've got to put my finger on that fret.
Yes.
Now the first dulcimer I showed you was tuned 155. Just put the melody in a different place. But DAD, CGC, any combination of 158 tuning or do, so, do is standard now, pretty much. Let me shift gears a little bit. Jeff, were you done with your question?
Yes, thank you very much. It's
Okay.
interesting.
Now, some of you know that I've done some work, some folklore research on the Isle of Man. And yes, this is all about Appalachia and all that, but the Celtic melodies came from the British Isles, and the Isle of Man is very much a Celtic little tiny country. It's halfway between Belfast and Liverpool, right in the middle of the Irish Sea, and it really is that big. I've written 2 books of tunes featuring the mountain dulcimer playing these Celtic tunes, and I took some photographs during my trips there, and good old David Durr designed the covers of my 2 books. I gave him the photographs and he superimposed the Manx cats. And yes, the Isle of Man is where the tailless cat comes from. So I always like to feature a few tunes from the Isle of Man. First one I want to play. Now, you notice I've been using a pick up to this point. Now I'm going to switch to using just my fingers, and this is probably my favorite way of playing it. I like to touch the strings. And for the softer side of the dulcimer, it works out very nicely. So, a couple of tunes from the Isle of Man. The first one is called the Milking Song, and this is a song that would have been sung by the farmers to their cows with the idea that relaxed cows give more milk. And for the ladies of Camerata, we rehearsed for a short time on this piece for the concert which would have happened last May and which I hope will happen next May. So this is the instrumental version of the Milking Song. You'll be so relaxed, you'll just fall right to sleep. Here comes the cat. He likes music. He likes music. He really does. He loves my dulcimer. This is Artie. Go away now. Thank you. Now I'm going to do something magical. This capo fits right over here. And now, if I've got it down well, I can now, no, don't you dare. I can now play in a minor mode. There's Aeolian and Dorian, all just by having this on here. So I'm going to play for you the title song from my CD. Ta-da! Another David Durr design. You might be able to see it easier here. Song called Alas, the Horse is Gone. Now, when I was trying to learn how to pronounce and translate Manx Gaelic, I made a mistake. I thought the song, especially in a minor mode, meant that the horse was dead. Nope, he just galloped off into the Manx sunset. Now, I took this photograph of a village called Cregnish down in the southern tip of the Isle, and I gave the photograph to David Durr and said, okay, put a horse on here somehow, Photoshop it on. And that's what he gave me. We didn't realize until after I had printed 1,000 copies of this that this is actually an Indian paint pony, not a Manx draft horse, but that's okay. Nobody knows except you and me. So this is a jig. I love this piece. And at the very end, you'll hear this horse galloping off into the sunset. And off he goes. Now, a little bit of research I did. Fascinating. One little tiny sentence I found in a book that was written in the 1920s said that the ancient Celtic fiddles were set up with only 3 strings, and that the melody string was always being bowed, but occasionally the fiddler would reach across and grab the other 2 strings as drones. That music was just meant for the modern dulcimer. All right, moving along. One more tune from the Isle of Man. Another question I get asked quite a lot is, how do I arrange these tunes? Where do they come from? Back in the 1890s, 3 gentlemen, one of whom was a physician on the Isle of Man, went all around the island collecting tunes and writing them down. They were all amateur musicians. And one of the tunes that I found in his notebooks was a piece called Carnefarischen. Translated says, "This is the fairies' reel." And a cute little tune. Now, the fairies, or little people, according to Celtic folklore, are the people, the little tiny mischief players. Sometimes they'll go out during the night and they'll play pranks. Or they'll go out during the night and they'll do good deeds for families in need. The shoemaker's children is an example of elves during the night who do good deeds. But whatever they do, they have to be back home before the sun comes up, and they come back to their little forest floor, their little mossy area underneath all the leaves and the flowers, and they have a little party before they go to sleep. Sleep during the day and then go out the next night. So this would have been a dance that they might do. I picture it being kind of stately. But as I was trying to arrange it, I wanted to put it in one of the books, and it just wasn't coming together. It didn't sound right using this dulcimer. So I had the idea that something a little smaller would be more appropriate. And so on. So that felt a little bit better. Now this is a dulcimet. It's exactly half the size. And again, I think it was Becky who asked the question about, was it Becky or maybe Alexandra, about the placement of the frets. The shorter the distance between the bridge and the nut, the closer together the frets are. So this seemed more appropriate for a song about fairies having a little party, little elves in the nut. But even this one wasn't quite right for me. It seemed to me that little teeny tiny people would need a teeny tiny dulcimer. And here it is. You have to think small. Perfect, right? This is a real dulcimer. It cost as much as any of these big ones here. Made of the same materials by a dulcimer maker who makes regular standard size. But this is my teeny tiny dulcimer, and I just had to share that with you tonight. Well, moving on. Yes, this is a program about folk music, but you all know me and know that I love my classical music. So it wasn't long before I was trying to figure out how I could turn my dulcimer, a 3-string diatonically fretted dulcimer, into a classical instrument. I made it happen. In fact, there's one of my most recent books. This is Classical Dulcimer for Wascally Wabbits. And we'll talk all about the influence of Bugs Bunny cartoons on classical music before the evening is out. So this is my arrangement of, almost note for note, of a piano piece by Robert Schumann called Traumerei. Now let me just do one thing. Yes, I need to change. This extra fret gets in the way of this piece. A little note to myself to take it out. Lovely piece by Schumann. Now, I'm running close to 8:30 here. Does anybody mind if I take another 10 minutes or so to, or maybe there's so much I want to share with you?
Perfectly fine, Carol. Take what you need.
Thank you. Now, I was hoping you'd say yes. Thanks. This is my most special dulcimer. This is made by the same gentleman who builds the other one I've been playing, but this is his concert grand model, and it's strung a little bit differently and has a completely different voice, all hand carved, all these rosettes, not inserted, but carved out of a single solid piece of wood. And the back is also exquisite. You can see all the purfling and other details that he puts even on the back of his dulcimer. So this is a piece, I won't even announce it. You'll know what it is. Maybe already you know what it is. Bach's Cello Suite, for Prelude from Suite Number 1. Now you can't play a chromatic scale on a diatonically fretted dulcimer. And Bach wrote lots of chromatic scales. So in order to get that chromatic scale, I have to bend the strings as I'm climbing up. Takes a little extra pressure, but it can be done. So that's how you turn a Bach piece into something for a diatonic dulcimer. Now I have to bring out the beast. You've seen the smallest. Now you're seeing the largest. This is a 5-string. Now this is built in Indiana. Woodburn, Indiana, Footcraft Instruments, run by the Ash family. Has 5 strings, all of them tuned in open fifths, and capable of so much. And just it's got a huge body on it. It's just gorgeous. It's a recent acquisition. Now, hearkening back to the almost was and soon will be Appalachian concert, Chris asked me to play a solo for that concert as well. And I asked him if it would be okay if I played some variations on Simple Gifts, because that's the main theme in the Appalachian Spring piece. And I had just gotten this dulcimer a short while before that concert was scheduled, so I've had some time to refine it. So in honor of that concert, here is Simple Gifts variations. It kind of shows off the full range of this instrument. simple gifts. All right, well, I think I'll go one more piece for you, just to kind of finish things up. This is the piece I usually save for last when I'm doing concerts and such. And I need yet a different dulcimer for this one. One can never have too many dulcimers. This one is a recent acquisition also, built by a man.
Carol, how many dulcimers do you own in total?
I don't know. Maybe a dozen. I haven't counted lately. I have some upstairs, but these are my main go-to dulcimers. When I used to be on the road, I would load 6 or 7 of them in my camper. I'd put my cat in with me, and we would hit the road and do concerts all over the place. Hopefully that'll come back. So, okay, here's your challenge. When I do this piece live in front of an audience, I ask them to shout out the name of the piece if they can identify the title. And if anybody can do all of the pieces, great, I'll take them out for a beer after the concert. If they can also name the composer of all of these pieces, then I will take them out for a beer and a pizza. And I want you to know, in the 6 or 7 years since I've been performing this piece, I've had a lot of beer and pizza after concerts, but I've never had to pay for it myself. So, here's the deal. I have written a piece I call the Bugs Bunny Whapsody. You know so much more classical music than you ever realized, thanks to Looney Tunes, Warner Brothers, Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, all of that stuff. So I took that Warner Brothers theme and made it the bookends of this piece. Starts and ends with it. But in between are a few snippets, just real quick, of various classical themes, most of which have appeared in Bugs Bunny cartoons. I'll tell you, doing the research for that classical book, that was, I had to watch so many cartoons, really painful. So now that you're home and you can't shout out these names, here's your challenge. If you've got a piece of paper and pencil handy and no cheating, no Googling, you won't have time anyway, jot down the name of the piece as it comes by. And if you can get all of them and the composer, the first person to send your list to me in an email, I'll send you a free CD. Yes, I really will. So, finishing up with Bugs Bunny Whapsody. Thanks to Warner Brothers and Carl Stalling, who wrote all the rest of the music. Fasten my seatbelts here. This one is also known as Kill the Wabbit, just in case you were wondering. hear your thunderous applause. Well, I've come to the end of the pieces that I kind of wanted to play for you. I shortened it up a little bit. I hope I didn't take too much time, but thank you, Chris, especially for putting me onto this, and thank Dana and all the rest of you for showing up tonight and sharing all of this music with me. It's so much fun to play for people again and to laugh and to smile, and it's just great.
Carol, are you kidding? It is we who
was
thank
awesome.
you. That is just fantastic. And what a terrific teacher. I mean, it's not a surprise, but what a terrific teacher you are. It's
Yes.
just
Well, thank you.
something. Though
Yeah,
I think you've got to go milk your cat because that song was clearly some kind
Yeah,
of cue.
I've been upstaged by my cat, right? Yeah,
Aren't we all?
I can't wait for that. I knew that this concert program is going to be terrific, but your part in it is going to be so special for everybody. I love it. And tell me something. Do you tend, that I don't remember where we're doing that. Maybe it drew. Do you tend to mic the dulcimer in a concert hall situation?
definitely. Yeah, the Beast has a built-in pickup, but all the rest of these need a mic, just a condenser mic that's aimed at it and plugged in. In fact, I had already been talking to Ellis Hilton at Drew prior to that last concert.
yeah,
We
yeah.
had that all taken care of. So yes, it is a very intimate instrument.
I was going to say that's the one thing that you because you're set up. I mean, full disclosure, everybody. Carol and I check in from time to time, so I know about this really awesome Zoom setup that she has. But you can't tell just how intimate the sound of the instrument is, can you?
No, it is a very quiet instrument generally, but I get a lot of sound out of it. And I've got a single USB mic, which is aimed right at it. This is a state of the art kind of thing. So, yeah, I'm set up to teach privately using this setup, although I do it in my studio, not here. I've taken everything apart and moved it into the living room. And I teach workshops online regularly. Either as a part of festivals or just among my own customer base, which has grown exponentially thanks to virtual festivals this year. So I haven't been idle. This has been a good time for me. I've done some writing. I've done a lot of practicing. I dust off my dulcimers every day, and it's all just been great.
And you have been HGTVing your house. Your living room looks beautiful.
Well, thank you. I've only just begun. But thank you. I have to have a party here someday, everybody. I'm going to have a brand new front porch out here, and we'll be singing and jamming on the front porch.
I'm so glad, by the way, that we recorded this. We need to tell everybody that next year's concert won't make sense to our singers if they don't get to hear what you shared tonight. It's just terrific, Carol.
Thank you. It was
Thank
my honor.
Thank you, Carol.
Fantastic.
This is wonderful,
Thank you so
Carol.
much
Thank
for
you.
your time, Carol. This was a delight.
Thank you for sharing, guys. I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Carol.
I have
Thank
another
you
Zoom
very
at
much.
9, but if
Now this-
anybody has questions, I'll hang around on this Zoom, but at 9 I have to break off to do another Zoom session, so. On the West
And
Coast.
everybody else we see, sorry, Dan, I don't have it in my head. It's 2 weeks that we see Marty, right?
That's correct. Yeah, and we'll of course send out an email.
And we have finished editing. There's one more thing that we have to go back for. The Mozart Requiem educational video to accompany the whole thing. So we will send that. You guys are going to be so smart.